Inasmuch as this construct is poorly understood and widely ignored, it represents a real source of potential outperformance for the initiated. To understand how the body impacts your financial choices, you must first and foremost grasp that the primary role of the body is to maintain homeostasis. As mentioned earlier, your body's two primary roles are to survive and reproduce. Central to your ability to do these two things is homeostasis, which is the process of maintaining physiological balance. Your homeostatic body temperature is 98.6 degrees. Get much below that and your body automatically pulls blood from the extremities. Get much above that and you cool yourself by sweating. In order to enlist our help in this process, deviation from homeostasis tends to feel bad and induces us to grab a coat or to turn on the air conditioner, or in my case, to stop exercising. As Kammerer, Lowenstein and Prellick point out, rather than viewing pleasure as the goal of human behavior, a more realistic account would view pleasure as a homeostatic cue, an informational signal. As a general rule, our decisions get worse as the body deviates in either direction from its homeostatic set point. 20 mild, positive affect, the sort you might experience on any old good but not great nothing special going on day, is well recognized as being positively correlated with everything from cognitive flexibility to creative problem solving. Sadness takes psychic energy, and there is a freedom that comes with being upbeat in a way that is still within homeostatic bounds. But as we learned earlier, consequential financial decisions are unlikely to land in this generally happy but no big deal decisional sweet spot. Money, it turns out, is a very big deal to us, and our physiological arousal ticks up when we are making financial decisions, leading us to rapidly depart homeostasis station, bound for freak-out pass. Excessive levels of physiological arousal decrease working memory and cognition, and so, just as extreme cold pulls blood away from your fingers and toes, dealing with money shunts processing power away from your brain. 21 A body that is out of homeostasis can actually alter our preferences, and in ways that we might not fully appreciate. We want to think that we make decisions based on reason, ethics and time-tested principles, but research suggests that it may have just as much to do with what we've had to eat. Judge Jerome Frank's seemingly sarcastic quip that "justice is what the judge ate for breakfast" may contain an uneasy kernel of truth, based on the work of Shai Danziger of Ben-Gurion University. Danziger examined the results of 1,112 parole board hearings from Israeli prisons over a 10-month period. 22 The study found that prisoners begin the day, right after the judge has enjoyed breakfast, with a 65% chance of parole, but those odds begin to plummet shortly after, with the most draconian rulings being handed out right before lunch. After lunch, by some miracle of jurisprudence, the judge's leniency returns but then falls again until, you guessed it, snack time. The results of Danziger's work are frankly shocking and discouraging. When people's lives and the welfare of the broader society are on the line, judgments ought to be made based on a dispassionate application of the law, not a hankering for a Snickers bar. Although no similar studies currently exist for investment decision-making, it seems reasonable to suppose that something as seemingly trivial as hunger could have a dramatic impact on results. Perhaps Warren Buffett's 800 calories a day of Coca-Cola are the secret to his success. Exploring this further, another study showed that hungry people are not only desirous of food, but they also desire money and are more greedy. Related work demonstrates that individuals who are fasting tend to take riskier financial bets than those who are full. As Dana Smith reports, this tendency is not unique to humans. This finding is supported by the animal literature, in which animals are more risk-averse when sated but risk-seeking when hungry. This is presumably an evolutionarily selected trait prompting exploration and risk-seeking when in states of hunger, which could potentially lead to the acquisition of new food sources. It would seem that homeostatic deficits in one area impact the seemingly unrelated world of financial decision-making in predictable ways. If bodily hunger can generalize to financial want, perhaps visceral control can as well. A group of researchers in the Netherlands set out to investigate in a most unusual way. Led by Miriam Tuck, researchers assigned participants into two groups, the first who consumed 700 milliliters of water and the second consumed 50 milliliters of water. Subjects were then asked to engage in a task that would allow them to get a small reward more immediately or a larger reward upon waiting for a much longer period of time. Shockingly, to me at least, Those who drank more water and reported a very high urgency to urinate chose the delayed option with more frequency than those who'd had less water and reported less urgency to urinate. Tuck and her team propose an explanation that, while surprising, fits nicely with the spillover effects of hunger discussed above. Referring to this effect as inhibitory spillover, the authors hypothesize that the bodily restraint needed to keep from using the bathroom had a knock-on effect that increased ability to wait for a larger financial reward as well. 23 You may now put down the book. The secret to financial success is always needing to pee. The biggest danger of physiological impediments to decision-making is that they operate surreptitiously. Ask an Israeli judge why he hands down the ruling he does and he will undoubtedly point to a leather-bound tome and not his stomach. Our belief in free will and personal accountability means that we tend to ignore bodily determinants of behavior, and this is much to the disadvantage of investors everywhere. But it is worth asking, are we able to rein in and control our bodily reactions to risk and uncertainty once we become aware of them? Can we better maintain homeostasis through practice? Andrew Lowe examined a variety of autonomic nervous system (ANS) responses, including respiration, skin temperature, facial movements and blood volume, among traders of various experience levels. As we might expect, Lowe found that more experienced traders exhibited less elevated ANS responses to market volatility than traders who were just starting out. Experienced traders were better able to maintain homeostasis, with all of the cognitive benefits that entails, but still showed marked physiological responses. Money moves the physiological needle. Period. 24 Those hungry Israeli judges we looked at averaged 22 years of experience, and their verdicts accounted for 40% of all parole decisions made in Israel over the course of the study. These were experienced professionals whose objectivity was compromised by whether they were hungry or not. Whenever I see an extreme athlete perform a dangerous stunt, say, a backflip on a motorcycle, I wonder how many broken bones it took to achieve their current level of expertise. With enough experience, investors can moderate, but never be truly free of, the damaging impact of extreme physiological responses to market moves. But at what cost along the way? Risk hurts. If I asked you to free associate for a moment on the word stress, what are the first few words or descriptions that come to mind? You probably imagine some sort of psychic anguish, uncertainty at work, worry about the welfare of a loved one, or financial insecurities. The most commonly used colloquial definition of stress, loss of perceived control over an event, is likewise psychological in nature. But our emphasis on stress as a mental state ignores the real bodily impact it produces and ignores some of the more practical ways in which it can be managed. In a time when being stressed out seems to be such a ubiquitous part of daily life, it is amazing to consider that the idea of psychological stress was seen as hooey as recently as a century ago. The term as we currently use it today was coined by endocrinologist Hans Selye in the 1930s and was discovered, quite by accident, as Selye was conducting research with mice. While injecting mice with hormones, Selye began to hypothesize that the process itself, being caged, corralled, stuck with needles and scrutinized, was producing bigger changes in the mice than the hormones in the syringes. Borrowing a term from engineering, Selye proposed that a mental state of anguish was producing physical sequelae in the mice, an idea that was met with intense skepticism at the time. But what may have seemed laughable in Selye's day is now understood to be deadly serious. Stress hurts. Stress is implicated in conditions as diverse as obesity, hypertension, erectile dysfunction, infertility, insomnia, and cardiovascular disease. An estimated 25% of all visits to a medical doctor are stress-related conditions that end in a referral to a psychologist rather than a surgeon. Nowhere is the connection between mind and body as apparent as it is when considering stress, and nothing excites our stress response quite like money. Investors looking to manage stress en route to improved outcomes must first understand the ways in which it is a profoundly physical phenomenon. John Coates, a former trader turned neuroscientist and investment stress researcher par excellence, said in the New York Times, "Most of us tend to believe that stress is largely a psychological phenomenon, a state of being upset because something nasty has happened. But if you want to understand stress, you must disabuse yourself of that view. The stress response is largely physical. It is your body priming itself for impending movement. 25 A racing heart, dilating eyes, a body coursing with cortisol and adrenaline. All of this is priming you to act, now. But when the dreaded stimulus never appears or plays out over nearly 500 days, the average length of a bear market, the body has generated a physical response that is both ill-fit to the needs of the situation and presents a real health risk. In appropriate doses and over short time frames, stress can be a lifesaver. Stress and performance have been shown to exist in what is referred to as an inverted U model, shown below. The inverted U model shows that with too little stress you never get off the couch, and with too much stress you choke. In moderation, the cortisol produced by feelings of stress is a sort of wonder drug that increases physical arousal, improves memory, promotes learning, enhances sensation seeking, and increases motivation. But if stress persists over a longer period, say like that associated with most market downturns, the exact opposite occurs. Behavioral flexibility decreases, immunological systems are compromised, attention wanes, depressive symptomatology emerges, and learned helplessness replaces feelings of self-efficacy. John Coates set up to study directly what previous research had only hinted at, the relationship between stress hormones and risk-taking. Coates' first study was to establish a baseline effect of cortisol production during times of market volatility. His seminal research found that the cortisol levels of traders increased a whopping 68% over a period of just 8 days. In a follow-up study, he pharmacologically replicated the impact of the cortisol levels on the traders and then gauged their risk-taking preferences on a gambling task. The results, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, found that participants' appetite for risk fell by an incredible 44% as a result of the elevated levels of cortisol. 26 Formerly thought of as primarily a mental construct, Coates' findings turned traditional notions of risk tolerance on their head and painted a more dynamic picture of the interplay between mind and body. As he opines in The Biology of Risk, most models in economics and finance assume that risk preferences are a stable trait, much like your height. But this assumption, as our studies suggest, is misleading. Humans are designed with shifting risk preferences. They are an integral part of our response to stress or challenge. Once again, we observe that decisions and ideas that feel internally volitional can be greatly manipulated by physical externalities. Advantageous financial risk-taking is not some intellectual puzzle that can be reasoned through and taken advantage of by sheer force of will. The intransigence of fear. From 1900 to 2013, the U.S. stock market experienced 123 corrections, a 10% or greater drawdown, an average of more than one per year. The more dramatic losses that are the hallmark of a bear market occur only slightly less frequently, averaging one every 3.5 years. Although the media talks about 10% to 20% market losses as though they are the end of the world, they arrive as regularly as spring flowers and have not negated the tendency of markets to dramatically compound wealth over long periods of time. It is incredible to consider that over that 100+ years, one could expect both double-digit annualized returns with attendant double-digit percentage losses. But to be able to realize these great gains amid great pain, investors must check their fear of loss at the door, a task that your imperfect biology will make extremely difficult. As much as we may wish it were otherwise, our bodies seem uniquely skilled at holding on to fear and letting it loose at just the inopportune time. In a paradigmatic experiment that bears this out, Ledoux, 1996, fear-conditioned rats by repeatedly pairing an electric shock with an auditory stimulus. In a move that would make Pavlov grin, the rat eventually need only hear the tone to begin to worry. But once the animal had been sufficiently conditioned to fear, researchers then began to extinguish the fear by providing the stimulus, the tone, with no accompanying shock. Eventually, the fear response abates and the rat goes about its rat business upon hearing the tone. We might now assume that the fear has dissipated entirely and that the rat has overcome its original fear, but the reality is far more bizarre. The researchers, who really must hate rats, next severed the neural connections between the cortex and amygdala and presented the tone again, at which time the rat promptly freaked out. The fear was not gone at all. Rather, the fear was being suppressed by the cortex but remained, hidden in the amygdala, for such a time as the painful stimulus might reappear. Ledoux's findings suggest that the body, ever intent on preservation, actually hangs on to bad experiences and brings them right back to the surface when similar bad news re-emerges. 4 Steps to Managing Stress. Michelle McDonald developed the RAIN model, a simple but powerful system for managing an episode of acute stress. Try this the next time you are stressed. Recognition. Deliberately observe and name what is occurring in your body and mind. For instance, I feel my heart and mind racing. Acceptance. Acknowledge and accept the presence of whatever you observed above. You don't have to love it, but fighting will make it worse. Investigation. Ask yourself what stories you are telling yourself and examine what thoughts are present. Non-identification. Now that you have recognized, accepted and investigated your stress, you must realize that you are more than your emotions. You can feel something without being defined by it. What's the big idea? Physical states can impact emotion just as surely as the reverse is true. Loss aversion kept our ancestors alive. It keeps you from being a successful investor. The body longs for homeostasis. Thinking about money disrupts homeostasis. Stress is as much a physical as it is a psychic phenomenon. Taking financial risk causes real bodily pain. Fear is impossible to extinguish since the body stores it for a rainy day. Bad news in the stock market is more regular than your birthday. Notes. 19 Rose McDermott, James H. Fowler and Oleg Smirnov, on the evolutionary origin of prospect theory preferences, The Journal of Politics, April 2008. 20 C. Kammerer, G. Lowenstein and D. Prelick, Neuroeconomics. How Neuroscience Can Inform Economics, Journal of Economic Literature, March 2005, page 27. 21 F. G. Ashby, V. V. Valentine and U. Turkin, The Effects of Positive Affect and Arousal on Working Memory and Executive Attention, in S. Moore and M. Oxford, eds. Emotional Cognition. From Brain to Behavior. John Benjamins, 2002, pp. 245 to 287. 22 E. Yang, Justice is Served, but More So After Lunch. How Food Breaks Sway the Decisions of Judges, Discover, April 11, 2011. 23 M. A. Tuck, D. Tramp and L. Warlop, Inhibitory Spillover, Psychological Science, April 2011. 24 A. W. Lowe, The Adaptive Markets Hypothesis. Market Efficiency from an Evolutionary Perspective, August 2004. 25 J. Coates, The Biology of Risk, New York Times, June 7, 2014. 26 N. Kandasamy, B. Hardy, L. Page, M. Schaffner, J. Gragaber, A. S. Paulson, P. C. Fletcher, M. Gurnell and J. Coates, Cortisol Shifts Financial Risk Preferences, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States of America, March 4, 2014. Compart 2. Investor Psychology. If you don't know who you are, Wall Street is an expensive place to find out. Adam Smith, The Money Game. As a child I loved reading Rudyard Kipling's Just So stories, a collection of tales originally crafted as bedtime stories for his daughter who demanded that they be told. Just so, using the same words she was accustomed to. Each of the stories provides a magical take on evolutionary biology and describes how various animals acquired their most distinctive features. In How the Whale Got His Throat, we learn that whales can only eat plankton as a result of one having swallowed a mariner who subsequently tied a raft inside its throat to prevent others from meeting his fate. In How the Camel Got His Hump, we learn that the dromedary's hump is a result of being lazy and being cursed by a genie with a hump that allows for greater work between periods of rest. In each case, the animal endures some hardship but is ultimately rewarded with a distinctive feature that is evolutionarily adaptive. Just like the stories themselves, the animals are created, just so. It is satisfying to think of a world where nature conspires to work in our favor, but it is sadly not reflective of our reality when it comes to financial decision-making. As you now know from the previous chapters, your body and brain were created to do a great many things with remarkable efficiency, but investing happens not to be one of them. In fact, if a demigod, evil genie, or vengeful mariner set out to design the worst investor possible, they would have designed you. When it comes to investing, you were not created just so. The flaws in your design quite naturally lead to quirks in your behavior, and creating a system that accounts for these quirks is a foundational element of any sound investment philosophy. Just as good defense wins championships but the quarterback gets the girl, risk management drives performance, but big returns get all of the press. And so before we answer the question, how can I become a skilled investor? We must first answer the less sexy but more important question, how can I not suck at investing? Said more gently, we must learn to manage risk. If you accept this as a fact and pick up a textbook on risk management, you are likely to read about two primary types of investment risk, systematic and unsystematic. Systematic risk, also known as market risk, is the chance that you will lose money as a result of moves in the broad market as opposed to factors relating to any business in particular. Unsystematic risk, also referred to as business risk, is the chance that an investment in an individual security will depreciate in value due to factors pertaining to that business. What your textbook will likely omit altogether is a third type of risk, behavioral risk, and this is the most important risk of all. Codifying a universe of behavioral risk is a prerequisite to successfully managing it. After all, how can you fight a monster that you can't see? In many cases, our universe of behavioral risk is generated from studies of investor misbehavior. As Daniel Kahneman says in The Undoing Project, how do you understand memory? You don't study memory, you study forgetting. Misbehaving. Richard Thaler's incredible origin story of the field of behavioral economics recounts the simple but effective way that he set the discipline on its current course. Incredulous about what he was learning about efficient markets, Thaler set out to brainstorm all of the real-life ways in which the people he knew differed from the econs, i.e., fictional individuals who optimize utility and always make rational financial decisions, he was learning about in his theory courses. Using nothing more than a simple thought experiment, Thaler created a list of behavioral anomalies that spawned numerous research projects and vastly deepened our understanding of how mere mortals make financial decisions. While the discovery and documentation of these behavioral anomalies was an important first step, they lack utility to investors inasmuch as there is no broader organizing framework. We now have long lists of the ways in which we are imperfect, but little in the way of practical next steps. As research has shown, bad news without a concrete solution set can actually exacerbate the problem. Inspired by the simple elegance of Thaler's approach, I put on my catastrophic thinking cap and set out to brainstorm every possible way someone's behavior could negatively impact investment decision-making. I found over 117 different biases and heuristics that could lead an aspiring investor from making optimal decisions. Ouch. To make this universe more useful to investors, I looked for common psychological underpinnings among the various modes of error and grouped them accordingly. I began this process without preconceptions of how the information would shake out. At the end, 4 consistent types of behavioral risk emerged: ego, conservatism, attention, emotion. All behavioral risk has one or more of these 4 risk factors at its core. This classification is unique to this book and provides an important starting point for the creation of behaviorally informed investment management processes. We'll now move on to examine each of these pillars of investor behavior in turn in the chapters that follow. Did you know? Research by Lowe, Repin and Steenbarger suggests that there is no best trader personality type. Despite the popular portrayal of successful investors as brash, extroverted, risk seekers, success in financial markets is more about mastering the 4 facets of behavioral risk and less about fitting a certain investor mold. Chapter 4. Ego. Don't be so humble, you're not that great. Golda Meir. Your child's intelligence is in the average range. As soon as I spoke the words, I could feel my body tensing for a rebuttal. As a graduate student in psychology, I was commonly called upon to assess the IQ of grade school children and quickly found that average was the word no parent wanted to hear. Giftedness is its own reward and a learning disability mobilizes parents in search of intervention, but average? Average? No one wanted to be average. Ever since the 1969 publication of The Psychology of Self-Esteem, 27, wherein Nathaniel Branden posited that self-esteem was the single most important facet of personal well-being, the self-esteem movement has been one of far-reaching influence. The U.S. has been a nation in search of a well-fed ego. In the 1970s and 1980s, anything seen as detrimental to feelings of self-worth was done away with. Gold stars proliferated while red pens gathered dust. First-place trophies gave way to awards for participation. In this new milieu, everyone was a winner, everyone was special. As this well-intentioned movement garnered support, scholarly research followed. In the 30-year run-up to the 21st century, over 15,000 articles were written on the impact of self-esteem on, well, pretty much everything imaginable. However, the results of these myriad studies were often confusing or inconclusive. In an attempt to make sense of the general trajectory of the literature on self-esteem, the Association for Psychological Science asked Dr. Roy Baumeister, an admitted proponent of the theory, to meta-analyze the extant data on the subject. What followed was what Dr. Baumeister would go on to refer to as the biggest disappointment of my career. Of the 15,000 studies taken into consideration, a paltry 0.013% of them, that is, 200, met the rigorous standards for inclusion in the meta-analysis. To begin with, it became apparent that many of the theories about self-esteem that had impacted policy were simply junk science. What's more, the studies that did pass muster didn't have much good to say about the construct's predictive power. Self-esteem did not predict academic or career achievement, nor did it predict drug usage or violent behavior. The biggest finding to emerge from the self-esteem movement was that praise did not predict self-esteem, accomplishment did. Telling someone that they are special is insufficient if they have not worked to earn it. We have an accurate internal sense of when we have earned praise and when we have not. If we feel as though we are being patted on the back undeservingly, it does not move the self-esteem needle 1 inch. 28. Unasked in this frenzy of self-congratulation is, do we even need this? Because if feelings of positive self-worth are important, and they don't seem to be, there is still nothing to suggest that they are lacking in most people. In fact, most people likely have too much rather than too little belief in self. You learned earlier that we make good enough decisions because we have big, hungry brains whose energy consumption our body is looking to curtail. In many cases, the cost of boosting our decision-making precision outweighs the benefits, and so we streamline those choices in a very particular way. We engage in egosyntonic satisficing. In a world full of ridiculous phrases, this has to be among the most ridiculous, but inasmuch as using it will impress people at cocktail parties, let me explain. Something that is egosyntonic is consistent with the goals of the ideal self-image. It's an idea that allows us to believe the best of ourselves. Satisficing is the process of selecting a good enough option on the basis of its availability rather than superiority. Thus, egosyntonic satisficing is the process of making easy decisions that support a belief in a self that is good, kind, and generally above average. So much of human behavior, political, religious, financial, can be explained by the fact that we want to think the best of ourselves and don't want to work very hard to do it. There is lots of evidence for this. When worldwide mathematical proficiency is considered, American high school students are squarely middle of the pack. However, when these same students are asked about how confident they are in their abilities, they lead the world. James Montier reports that over 95% of people think they have a better than average sense of humor. Peters and Waterman, in a book titled In Search of Excellence, found that 100% of men surveyed felt that they were better than average interpersonally, and that 94% of men felt as though they were athletically better than average. We are more in love with ourselves than is warranted, a fact that has dangerous implications for investment decision-making. In an effort to keep this love fest going and preserve precious cognitive processing power, we engage in a 3-step process. We look for supporting evidence, we congratulate ourselves for believing as we do, and we react violently against attacks to our worldview. Words to live by. If one were to attempt to identify a single problematic aspect of human reasoning that deserves attention above all others, the confirmation bias would have to be among the candidates for consideration. Many have written about this bias, and it appears to be sufficiently strong and pervasive that one is led to wonder whether the bias, by itself, might account for a significant fraction of the disputes, altercations, and misunderstandings that occur among individuals, groups, and nations. Raymond S. Nickerson. Be careful. People like to be told what they already know. Remember that. They get uncomfortable when you tell them new things. New things. Well, new things aren't what they expect. They like to know that, say, a dog will bite a man. That is what dogs do. They don't want to know that man bites a dog, because the world is not supposed to happen like that. In short, what people think they want is news, but what they really crave is olds. Not news but olds, telling people that what they think they already know is true. Terry Pratchett, through the character Lord Veterinary, in The Truth, a Discworld novel. Looking for truth in all the wrong places. The human understanding, when it has once adopted an opinion, either as being the received opinion or as being agreeable to itself, draws all things else to support and agree with it. Francis Bacon. It is human nature to try to confirm our existing beliefs rather than disconfirm them. To think, I'm probably right, rather than, why might I be wrong? This tendency to seek out information that agrees with our existing preconceptions is a big part of how we maintain our ego and is known in psychological literature as confirmation bias. Although we have only lately named and studied confirmation bias with scientific rigor, it has been observed throughout history. The Greek historian Thucydides, 460 BC, circa 395 BC, wrote, "For it is a habit of mankind to entrust to careless hope what they long for, and to use sovereign reason to thrust aside what they do not fancy." The Divine Comedy features Saint Thomas Aquinas cautioning Dante upon meeting in paradise that opinion, hasty, often can incline to the wrong side, and then affection for one's own opinion confines the mind. In his essay, What is Art?, famed novelist Leo Tolstoy speaks to this human tendency, saying, "I know that most men, not only those considered clever, but even those who are very clever and capable of understanding most difficult scientific, mathematical, or philosophic problems, can very seldom discern even the simplest and most obvious truth if it be such as to oblige them to admit the falsity of conclusions they have formed, perhaps with much difficulty, conclusions of which they are proud, which they have taught to others, and on which they have built their lives." Dick Cheney famously personified this tendency when he demanded that only Fox News be playing when he entered the room. The vice president, highly criticized by his Democratic counterparts and liberal news outlets like MSNBC, wanted to surround himself with less critical viewpoints. And while it's easy to pick on Vice President Cheney, he did shoot his friend in the face. After all, we are all guilty of surrounding ourselves with like-minded others and comfortable half-truths. A 2009 study out of Ohio State found that people spend 36% more time reading an essay if it aligns with their opinions. In the 2016 U.S. presidential election, a majority of those who voted for either of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton did not have a single friend who was voting for their non-preferred candidate. Regrettably for honest seekers of truth, it is becoming easier and easier to avoid information that doesn't square with a cherished personal narrative. The proliferation of news sites and highly specialized pundits means that we increasingly live in a world in which accepted truths chase an audience rather than an audience searching for truth. Don't like what you're hearing? Change the channel to the polarized tastemaker that fits your existing worldview. In general, we flock to those with whom we share a cultural, religious, political, or ideological identity. In so doing, we surround ourselves with a chorus of yes people who reinforce the validity of our opinions. Given the emotional wrangling involved with confronting conflicting ideas, immersing ourselves in an ideologically homogeneous pool is infinitely easier than the alternative. If everyone with whom we associate looks, acts, and thinks like we do, we are able to, successfully, skirt a number of tough internal struggles. Give yourself a hand. Our preservation of ego is not limited to searching for truth in all of the wrong places. It also extends to conducting intense internal promotional campaigns that serve to strengthen existing beliefs, referred to as choice supportive bias in the literature. To illustrate this concept, let's try an exercise. Let's pretend for a moment that you have agreed to be a part of a study I'm conducting. I bring you into a room and present you with 6 works of art. I then ask you to rank the 6 paintings from 1 to 6, with 1 being your most preferred and 6 being your least preferred. I further explain that you'll be able to leave today with a painting of your choosing. Now that you've completed the ranking assignment, I tell you that you can choose any one of the 6 paintings to take home. Naturally, you choose number 1 seeing as how it was your most preferred, and I retire to the back of the room to retrieve it. I return shortly with a worried expression and apologetically tell you that the paintings you ranked 1, 2, 5 and 6 are all picked over, leaving the ones you ranked 3 and 4 remaining. You can still have your pick of either 3 or 4, and you decide on 3 given that it was your slight preference. Now imagine that I give you 2 weeks off and invite you back into my office to rank the same 6 paintings in order of your preference. What do you hypothesize will have happened? Would your preferences remain the same, or would they have shifted? What might account for them changing or staying the same? Most people who participate in this experiment, commonly referred to as the free choice paradigm, change their preferences upon their return. Typically, we see the painting that was chosen, previously ranked number 3, will now be ranked more highly. Conversely, the painting that was not chosen, previously ranked number 4, will now be rated less well. What accounts for such a dramatic change over such a short period of time? After all, both of the paintings represented a sort of middling preference, neither greatly prized or greatly disliked at the initial ranking. How have they now migrated closer to the respective extremes? The answer lies in our need to maintain ego and to think of ourselves as competent, capable decision-makers who make choices based on rational criteria. Dr. Dan Gilbert, Harvard professor and happiness researcher extraordinaire, describes the thought process of participants thusly: "The one I got is really better than I thought. That other one I didn't get sucks." 29. The takeaway is this: once we have made a decision, we immediately start to look for all of the reasons why we were right. We may tell ourselves that we prefer the shading or the texture, or the way the painting frames a previously blank space in the living room. But whatever the specific reasons we construct, the general principle remains. We are not looking for truth, we are looking for comfort. We simultaneously play the other side of the fence and begin to mount an offensive against the road not taken. We are at least as tenacious at tearing down the unchosen option as we are at building up our commitment. Just ask anyone who has ever been broken up with by a partner that they didn't like anyway. Incredibly, the choice supportive bias is such a powerful tendency that it seems to exist somewhere so deep within us that it is even present in those unable to form short-term memories. Dan Gilbert and his team examined the impact of the free choice paradigm on a group of subjects with anterograde amnesia. In other words, a group of hospitalized individuals unable to form new memories. Like their neurotypical, that is, without brain damage, peers, the amnesiac patients were asked to rank the paintings from 1 to 6 and were given the option to keep either painting 3 or 4. Upon choosing a painting, the researchers promised to mail the chosen painting in a few days and left the room. 30, returning just 30 minutes later, the members of Dr. Gilbert's team reintroduced themselves to the amnesiacs who, unable to form new memories, had no recollection of having met with them before or having performed the exercise. To ensure that the amnesic patients were truly unable to form memories, the researchers then asked them to point to the painting that they had chosen before, a task at which the patients performed less well than chance guessing. The patients were then put through the whole ranking exercise again, with astonishing results. Just as with the neurotypical control group, the amnesic patients talked up the choice they made and dismissed the painting not chosen, even though they had no memory of having made a choice at all. Our need to view ourselves as competent and maintain ego lies somewhere so deep within us that not even cognitive impairment can touch it. The science of belief. The 2004 presidential campaign pitted the incumbent President George W. Bush against the Democratic challenger John Kerry. It also provided an opportunity for brain researchers to study the science of what makes belief so sticky. Researchers began by gathering participants who professed to have a well-defined preference for one candidate over the other. Participants were given seemingly contradictory statements either from President Bush, Senator Kerry, or a third politically neutral public figure. They were also given further information that made the seeming contradiction appear more plausible. They were then asked to determine whether or not the individuals in question had in fact made statements that were inconsistent. During the evaluation and thought process, research participants were monitored inside a magnetic resonance imaging (MRI) machine that allowed the scientists to observe their brain activity. As subjects evaluated seemingly contradictory statements made by their less preferred candidate, the emotional centers of their brain remained inactive. This allowed them to make cold, rational judgments about these statements. However, as the subjects evaluated the statements of their preferred candidate, the emotional centers of their brain became highly aroused. When the results were tallied, there were clear differences in the evaluations. Subjects were very likely to endorse their less preferred candidate as having said something contradictory, but were highly unlikely to say the candidate of their choice had made such a rhetorical error. Simply put, when their guy said something incorrect, their emotions drowned it out, but when the other guy said something implausible, they rationally pointed out the fallacious thinking. In simple terms, we rationally evaluate things that do not intersect with our worldview and emotionally evaluate those that do, as part of our ongoing effort to maintain a belief in our own rightness. As with all of the behavioral quirks that we have discussed, there is method to the madness of self-congratulations around belief. The theory is that this is a form of regret aversion designed to minimize unhappiness, promote well-being and save cognitive processing power for more important tasks. I mean, can you imagine how tired and depressed you'd be if you went around second-guessing yourself all of the time? Interestingly, we show no choice supportive bias when assigned an option through chance or random selection. It is only when our personal choices and pet beliefs come under scrutiny that we rally the ego to our defense. Backfire. My characterization of a loser is someone who, after making a mistake, doesn't introspect, doesn't exploit it, feels embarrassed and defensive rather than enriched with a new piece of information, and tries to explain why he made the mistake rather than moving on. Nassim Taleb. Paper or plastic? It's a question you've been asked 1,000 times, but one you've likely never thought too deeply about. But since I'm asking now, which do you think is better for the environment? Which do you choose when presented with alternatives at the grocery store? If you're like me, you likely choose paper, assuming that you're doing Mother Earth a favor in the process. If that's what you think, consider these facts from the You Are Not So Smart, YANSS podcast. Making a paper bag takes 3 times the amount of water as making a plastic bag. Only 24% of people reuse paper bags versus 67% reuse of plastic bags. Paper production creates 70% more air pollution than plastic production. It takes 91% more energy to recycle a pound of paper than a pound of plastic. Pretty shocking, right? In light of this new information, will you do things differently the next time you go to the grocery store? If you had previously opted for paper, you might well reconsider that now. Given that you had a low level of emotional investment in the paper versus plastic discussion, it is easy to update your beliefs in light of the new information you've just received. Next, let's try something a lot more emotionally laden: gun control. The laws around gun control should be more restrictive. Whether you agree or disagree with the statement above, odds are that you feel more passionately about it than you did the paper versus plastic conversation. You may have even noticed some changes in your respiration, posture, or thoughts as you readied to engage in a more meaningful conversation and prepared to defend your deeply held beliefs. Consider the following points about gun control, also from the YANSS podcast, in light of this new awareness of how it has impacted your body. 98% of guns used in the commission of a crime are stolen. Over 100,000 people successfully defend themselves with a gun each year. 9 times out of 10 gun owners defend themselves without firing a shot. More people drown each year than have been accidentally shot since 1980. Kitchen knives kill 10 times as many people each year as assault weapons. To be clear, I could come up with a list of facts just as compelling in favor of tighter gun control, but that's not the point here. The point is to observe your reaction to hearing information that does or does not conform to your deeply held beliefs. If you were previously in the paper bag camp and received information that called that opinion into question, you would likely revise your beliefs with no particular angst. But if you are in favor of tighter gun control and heard someone quoting statistics like the ones above, your reaction would likely be much different. Far from seamlessly assimilating new ideas into existing belief frameworks, research shows that we actually tend to get more firm in our cherished beliefs when those beliefs become challenged. Lee Ross and Craig Anderson completed a series of experiments using a structure called a debriefing paradigm to test the recalcitrance of belief to new information. 31 participants in these studies read fake evidence for an idea, after which time the change in their attitudes was measured, before the fakery was eventually exposed in detail. Their attitudes were then measured again to search for lingering effects of the now debunked idea. Even though they had been told in some detail that the original evidence was entirely fictional, a residue of bad belief tended to persist even after a full debriefing. A similar study at Stanford assigned students to read suicide notes and determine from the note whether or not the person in question had subsequently taken their own life. Some students were told they were immensely gifted at sorting completed suicides from those who had not gone through with it, while others were told they were not good at all at making the prediction. The only problem, the whole task was a ruse. The students who had been told that they were nearly always right were no more gifted than anyone else at the task. In part 2 of the study, the deception was revealed and the participants were informed that the true aim of the study was to gauge their reactions to thinking that they were right or wrong. They were then asked to rate how they had actually done on the task in light of this new information, and something strange happened. The students who had received fake news of their giftedness persisted in their belief that they were far more talented than average, and those who had received bad scores in round 1 remained committed to their idea of having done poorly. True or false, once an idea takes root, it can be very hard to dislodge. This tendency for beliefs to get even stronger in the face of contradictory evidence, known as the backfire effect, is even more pronounced when the information presented is ambiguous or unclear. A Stanford study presented participants with strong feelings about the death penalty with a sheet that set forth evidence both for and against capital punishment. Of those surveyed, 23% said that their views had become more extreme after reading the document, and all of those whose views had changed had moved in the direction of their pre-existing bias. Tabor and Lodge conducted a similar study in which those with strong opinions about gun control and affirmative action were asked to read arguments on both sides of those two issues. Those with the strongest previous feelings and well-identified political preferences showed even greater polarization in the direction of their extant beliefs. When presented with beliefs that challenged their own, the radical became even more radical. In cults, the process whereby the most militant members remain in the group is known as the evaporative cooling of beliefs. When a deeply held belief of the cult, say, that the world will end on a certain date, fails to materialize, the more moderate members realize their mistake and exit the group. The most radical among them, however, double down on the existing story and look for reasons to sustain the thinking, such as, maybe we weren't righteous enough to bring about the prophecy. The cult subsequently becomes even more radicalized, and the process repeats until you see tragedies the likes of Jonestown or Heaven's Gate. When you step on the scale and like what you see, what do? In all likelihood, you jump right back off and go about your day, secure in the knowledge that you are reaching your weight loss goals. But what about when you step on the scale and don't like the number staring back at you? At those times you likely step off and step back on, being careful not to lean too much or put undue pressure on the bearer of bad news. Get a clean bill of health and you skip out of the doctor's office, get a scary diagnosis and you double and triple check in disbelief. We are programmed to accept self-affirming truths at face value and to be deeply skeptical of anything that offends us. Deeply aware of the negative implications of ego, some investment shops appoint a dedicated devil's advocate to challenge the thinking of the portfolio manager. But research on people critical of vaccinations shows that when these people are presented with facts that disagree with their unscientific views, they actually become more entrenched in their wrong-headed position. The behavioral investor realizes that course-correcting bad ideas is nearly impossible, and that designing a system inoculated against untruth is the far better route. The most ignored phrase in investing: those who do not know the torment of the unknown cannot have the joy of discovery. Claude Bernard. Sir John Templeton famously opined that the most expensive words in investing were, "This time is different." After all, this sort of new era thinking is to blame for everything from the excesses of the Jazz Age, that led to the Great Depression, to the astronomical valuations of the .com bubble. When trusted metrics like profitability and sales growth give way to mindshare and eyeballs on the page, disaster is not far off. But if "this time is different" is the most expensive phrase in investing, I would like to nominate "I don't know" as the most overlooked phrase in investing, with "I was wrong" as a close second. As is so often the case, the usefulness of these beliefs in an investment context is directly proportional to their behavioral difficulty. Acceptance of uncertainty and a belief in personal fallibility are remunerative precisely because they come so hard to humankind. It is strange to consider that many of the most effective tactics in investing have "I don't know" at their core. Passive investing is the embodiment of "I don't know" investing. If you're not sure what's good and what's not, just buy the market. In large part due to this attitude of humility, passive vehicles have spanked active funds over just about any time frame you'd care to consider. Just look at the results of the SPIVA scorecard, a comparison of how active managers have done relative to their passive counterparts. Over 5 and 10-year periods, respectively, 88.65% and 82.07% of large capitalization money managers were beaten by passive approaches to investing, and that's before their fees. The results for small capitalization stocks, often considered to be less efficiently priced and therefore more favorable to active management, are just as damning. 87.75% of small-cap managers were bested by passive approaches. Diversification is likewise rooted in an ethos of, you can't be sure of anything so buy everything, and is proof that conceding to uncertainty does not have to mean compromising returns. In fact, broad diversification and rebalancing have been shown to add 0.5 percentage point of performance per year, a number that can seem small until you realize how it is compounded over an investment lifetime. For evidence of the efficacy of diversification and rebalancing, take, for example, the case of European, Pacific and U.S. stocks cited in A Wealth of Common Sense. From 1970 to 2014, the annualized returns were as follows. European stocks, 10.5%. Pacific stocks, 9.5%. U.S. stocks, 10.4%. Similar returns, but let's examine what happens when all three markets are combined, equally weighted and rebalanced each year-end to maintain consistent portfolio composition. In what can only be described as a diversification miracle, the average return of the portfolio over this time is 10.8% annualized, greater than any of its individual parts. Not bad for not having a clue. Despite the efficacy of, I don't know, investing, it still remains an underutilized approach. The reasons for this lie in our deep-seated needs for felt personal competence and are hard to extinguish, even in the face of compelling evidence. I don't know. The quest for certainty is the biggest obstacle to becoming risk-savvy. Gerd Gigerenzer. Aerophobia, also known as aviophobia, is the fear of flying in airplanes or helicopters and impacts an estimated 25% of air travelers in some form or another. The fear of flying is no respecter of persons and negatively impacts such notables as gangster rapper KRS-One, football coach John Madden, tattooed drummer Travis Barker, of Blink-182, and the despotic duo of Joseph Stalin and Kim Jong-il. An appetite for committing crimes against humanity, it would seem, is no guarantee of a stomach for flying. But despite our widespread fear of flying, it remains one of the safest, if not the safest, means of travel available. Statistics from 2014 from the National Travel Safety Board found that 0 people were killed on commercial airliners in one calendar year, 32 compared with 38,300 fatalities and 4.4 million injuries in automobile accidents over that same period. Assuming you fly once a year, you would surpass your risk of injury by car by driving a mere 12 miles. Considering that most Americans drive more like 12,000 miles per year, the numbers are laughably discrepant. But the safety of air travel has not always been as exceptional as it now is, and those improvements owe largely to a commitment to, I don't know, and I was wrong. The airline industry has embraced simple but powerful best safety practices such as religious reliance on pre-flight checklists and System Think, a program that brings pilots, mechanics, air traffic controllers, regulators and the airlines themselves together to discuss past errors and consider a safer future for the passengers they serve. Shockingly, this commitment is not shared by one place you'd definitely expect it to be readily adopted: hospitals. As Gerd Gigerenzer says of hospitals in risk-savvy, national systems of reporting and learning from serious errors, as in aviation, rarely exist. 33, which is the biggest reason why the Institute of Medicine estimates that somewhere between 44,000 and 98,000 patients are killed each year by preventable medical errors. That's right, hospitals may kill twice as many people as car accidents, and medical errors are the third leading cause of death in the U.S., behind only heart disease and cancer. In capital markets, we pay a steep price for our hubris. In hospitals, that debt is paid in human life. One perverse quirk about our search for certainty is that the more random an event is, the more certain we become. Jason Zweig shares that participants in one ambiguous study reported 68% certainty in their ability to determine whether a drawing had been created by an Asian or European child. Likewise, College students reported 66% certainty that they could name which U.S. states had the highest graduation rates. In both cases, the actual results were at or below chance levels. A related concept, perhaps my favorite in all of psychology, is what is known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. To put their findings in delicately, David Dunning and Justin Kruger of Cornell University found that dumb people are too dumb to know how dumb they are. 34 Their inquiry into the subject was inspired by the case of MacArthur Wheeler, a bank robber who attempted to disguise his identity by covering his face in lemon juice. Aware that lemon juice was used as invisible ink, MacArthur reasoned that it would likewise make his face invisible. By studying this idiot and others like him, Dunning and Kruger found reliably that incompetent people fail to recognize their own lack of skill and have difficulty gauging the skill level of others. To recap, doctors and investment advisors have specialized knowledge and are highly esteemed, which contributes to the difficulty they have relying on something as banal as a checklist or uttering something as self-effacing as, "I have no idea." On the other end of the spectrum, those with limited knowledge tend to overstate their competence by their very lack of competence. And to put a cherry on top of the whole mess, the more random a situation is, the more certain we tend to be of the outcome. Smart or stupid, young or old, expert or novice, we have a really difficult time with uncertainty and admissions of wrongdoing. Exceptional mediocrity. Willard Van Orman Quine was a logician, philosopher and professor at Harvard University. He is one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century and is celebrated for an unusual mutation to his office computer. He removed the question mark key, stating, "I deal in certainties." While Professor Quine's extraction is comical and grandiose, it is a fine metaphor for how most of us go about our lives. We see ourselves as the center of the universe, overstating the likelihood of positive occurrences and delegating the dangerous. This tendency gets us out of bed, gives us the courage to talk to the attractive person at the bar and encourages us to start restaurants and businesses, neither of which is rational in a purely probabilistic sense. But in a refrain that is by now becoming familiar to you, the adaptations that serve us so well elsewhere in life are ill-fit to the needs of the investor. Becoming a behavioral investor means examining the world in ways entirely foreign to us, with ourselves as an insignificant part of a much larger tapestry, with no special gifts, knowledge or luck. It means owning that we are, on average. But the paradox in owning our personal mediocrity is that it makes us, in the strictest sense of the word, exceptional. It is not about believing in yourself, in fact, it's quite the opposite. It's about realizing that the less you need to be special, the more special you'll become. As investor and author James P. O'Shaughnessy says in What Works on Wall Street, the key to successful investing is to recognize that we are just as susceptible to crippling behavioral biases as the next person. Exceptional investment outcomes are attainable by all of us, if we just stop trying so hard. What's the big idea? Believe in yourself, is really bad advice for investors. You tend to search out information that proves what you already believe. You nearly break your arm patting yourself on the back for the decisions you make. We react violently to challenges to cherished beliefs and may double down. "I don't know," is a profitable if seldom uttered sentiment. Paradoxically, the more ambiguous a situation, the more certain we become. If you feel passionately about an investment idea, you probably haven't thought hard enough about it. Notes. 27 Nathaniel Branden, The Psychology of Self-Esteem, a revolutionary approach to self-understanding that launched a new era in modern psychology. Josie Bass, 2001. 28 Daniel Crosby, You're Not That Great, Word Association Publishers, 2012. 29 Dan Gilbert, The Surprising Science of Happiness TED Talk, February 2004. 30 Ibid. 31 Lee Ross and Craig Anderson, Shortcomings in the Attribution Process. On the Origins and Maintenance of Erroneous Social Assessments, in Daniel Kahneman, Paul Slovic and Amos Tversky. Eds. Judgment Under Uncertainty. Heuristics and Biases. Cambridge University Press, 1982, pp. 129-152. 322014 NTSBUS Civil Aviation Accident Statistics. 33 Gerd Gigerenzer, Risk Savvy. How to Make Good Decisions, Penguin, 2015. 34 Justin Kruger and David Dunning, Unskilled and Unaware of It. How difficulties in recognizing one's own incompetence lead to inflated self-assessments. Journal of Personality and Social Psychology 77-6, 1999, pp. 1121-34. Com. Chapter 5. Conservatism. It's only after we've lost everything that we're free to do anything. Chuck Palahniuk, Fight Club. Some years ago, a German town was presented with an almost unheard of opportunity, the chance to totally reinvent itself. The town sat atop valuable mineral reserves that the West German government desperately needed. Vast swaths of the town would have to be razed to access the lignite being mined, but in return, the government offered to rebuild the town just down the road to whatever specifications the townspeople desired. Part of the reason the government felt so comfortable destroying the town was that it was nothing to speak of. It had developed haphazardly over the generations, winding in a serpentine path that made travel difficult, and was not particularly functional or beautiful. When asked to create a new town plan that would be entirely bankrolled by the government, the townspeople set forth a plan that looked, you guessed it, just like the ugly little hamlet that was to be destroyed. Given the chance to be anything they wanted to be, they engaged in the very natural human tendency to be what they had always been. This broad tendency to privilege sameness over change accounts for a host of human behaviors and is our second pillar of investor behavior, conservatism. The devil that you know. This year, roughly 10,000 people will die in drunk driving accidents. 1 in 3 people will be involved in an alcohol-related crash in their lifetime. A majority, 55%, of all family violence occurs in the homes of alcoholics. While we are all familiar with the dangers of alcohol abuse at a high level, statistics like these still stagger the mind. Given the damage done by drinking to excess, it seems natural that those negatively impacted by alcoholism in their youth would take pains to avoid it in adulthood. Why is it then that fully 50% of children of alcoholics go on to marry alcoholics themselves? There are a number of psychological variables at play that account for this tendency to prefer the devil that we know. One reason is that there is comfort in sameness. People want to know what they are getting into, even if it is boring, bad, or unfulfilling. Pain researchers have found that expected pain is much less disruptive than unexpected pain, even if the painful stimulus delivered is of exactly the same intensity. As Kurt Cobain crooned, "I miss the comfort in being sad." Conservatism is also buttressed by our natural tendencies to avoid regret, to esteem things we have as more valuable than those we don't, and to fear loss more than we seek gain. Whatever the specific psychological underpinnings, the pitfall of our natural conservatism is universal. It keeps us stuck. In an investment context, this can look like everything from holding losers too long, to failing to rebalance, to under-allocating to risk assets, all the way to a more general paralysis. Change requires much of us that is psychologically difficult: cognitive effort, adaptation, the potential for regret and loss, but it is also fundamental to becoming a behavioral investor. In life and markets, change is the only constant. Thinking is hard. How many decisions would you guess that you make in a given day? Take a second, mentally walk through your day and hazard a guess. Most people I ask this question land somewhere around 100, which is way off. Try 35,000.35, that's right, you make 35,000 decisions per day. Canonical models of decision-making deal with two types of decisions: certain, i.e., with a known set of alternatives with given outcomes, and uncertain, just the opposite. In theory, decisions made under conditions of certainty involve ranking the known alternatives and choosing the most preferred option. Simple enough. Uncertain decisions operate from a similar theory, with the only kink being that subjective probabilities are assigned to the different outcome likelihoods. Thus, decision makers weigh the desirability of a given option by the chance that it will or won't occur. These are nice ideas and make some sense until you consider the sheer volume of decisions we make each day. When you consider that you make 12,775,000 decisions each year, thinking that each determination is made by weighing its probabilistic utility starts to strain credulity. Making that many decisions sounds exhausting, and, indeed, the research supports that it is. This leads us to disproportionately stick with the familiar. In their Status Quo Bias in Decision-Making paper, Samuelson and Zeckhauser found that classical models of decision-making vastly underpredict the degree to which we stick with what we are already doing. When considering decisions as diverse as voting, making business decisions, choosing health insurance and managing retirement accounts, the two researchers found that we overwhelmingly default to the status quo. They illustrate the strength of this tendency using the metaphor of an incumbent politician taking on a challenger. In their words, an extrapolation of our experimental results indicates that the incumbent officeholder would claim an election victory by a margin of 59% to 41%. Conversely, a candidate who would command as few as 39% of the voters in the neutral setting could still earn a narrow election victory as an incumbent. 36 think that voters dispassionately weigh the pros and cons of politicians when making a choice. Think again. More often than not, they pull the lever for the person that's already seated. Wansink and Sobel of Cornell found that we are similarly impacted by conservatism in the way that we the well over 200 food decisions that we confront each day. 37 In their first study, the professors examined how aware participants were of having actually made a decision around food. The 139 participants in their study underestimated the number of food decisions they made by an average of 221. It is a testament to the degree to which we are on autopilot that we can make decisions so wholly beneath our awareness. Their second study looked at those who overate by virtue of having been given an environmental default, a large bowl. When asked why they overate, almost no one attributed it to defaulting to the status quo. 21% of participants denied having overeaten altogether. 75% attributed it to hunger, and a scant 4% copped to the fact that, yeah, I just filled up the bowl because it was there. There is a reason that the art house films and documentaries in your Netflix queue never get watched. Your brain is exhausted. After a long day at work, you want Michael Bay, not Lars von Trier. You are confronted with a staggering number of decisions to make each day. Drawing on this very idea, Edwards, 1968, found that our tired brains mean that we don't update our beliefs rationally, and that, the more useful the evidence, the greater the shortfall between actual updating and rational updating. 38 Pause for a moment and consider how incredible that statement is. Important information is almost of necessity hard to digest. Our mental fatigue ensures that we leave relevant new information to the side and rely instead on well-trodden mental paths of dubious quality. As was previously mentioned, your brain is the most metabolically inefficient part of your body, and one way that you conserve energy is by going with defaults. You don't calculate how much cereal you need to fuel your morning, you just fill up the bowl. You don't create a spreadsheet comparing the pros and cons of your workplace retirement options, you just go with the one you've had for the past 5 years. You don't rebalance your portfolio, you let it ride. Conservatism is a fact of life that exists in no small part because your decision-making abilities are stretched to their limit. It's not good or bad, it just is. And as we will discuss in subsequent chapters, there are very real ways to make this construct work in your favor. Inaction means never having to say you're sorry. Imagine that you are at home alone with a young child asleep in her crib. You have an urgent errand to run that is time-sensitive but should be fairly quick, say 15 minutes. Would you wake the child and take her with you on the errand, or leave her asleep, knowing that she is contained in the crib even if she awakes? Most people, myself included, automatically say that they would wake up the child and take her along on the trip, and for a very specific reason. Regret avoidance. If, in the course of you running your errand, the house caught fire or was robbed with the child inside, your guilt would be unbearable. All of this, of course, ignores the probability that harm will come to the child in one or another instance. Home fires are extremely rare, and the likelihood that a sleeping child in a crib will be harmed in 15 minutes is infinitesimal. Auto accidents, on the other hand, are very common, and the risk that the child will be harmed as your companion in running errands is very real. The imagined regret of not protecting a child you left alone is more salient and vivid than the statistics surrounding auto fatalities. Stories ignite the mind while probability puts us to sleep, and